architecture and construction, it's kind of death by a million cuts.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Architecture. I'm your host, Rion Willard. Joining me today is Ben Parco, a distinguished architect with over 35 years of experience and a remarkable 20 million square feet of Class A construction to his name. Ben's expertise covers a wide array of project types, from commercial offices and R&D facilities to higher education, civic spaces, hospitality, transportation, and residential developments. Ben is known for his thoughtful and energetic leadership, consistently delivering projects that not only meet but exceed expectations. His particular strength lies in creating high-value solutions for commercial and workplace environments, including corporate campuses and urban mixed-use developments. A leading voice in sustainable design, Ben's work in prefabrication and low-carbon buildings even caught the eye of former Vice President Al Gore, with his insights contributing to Gore's book, Our Choice. As founder of Parco Studio, Ben continues to innovate across various sectors, while also rediscovering his love for designing single-family homes and estates. He is also dedicated to mentoring the next generation of architects through his roles at UC Berkeley, the University of Washington, and California College of the Arts. In this episode, we will be discussing beginning project development as an architect and doing your own projects. And Ben walks us through a project that he is engaged in at the moment and how they found it. We talk about the processes that Ben has been taking to work towards becoming a client-free firm. And we also look at what are the fundamentals that absolutely had to be in place to ensure this kind of adventure into the world of development is feasible. So loads of really great golden nuggets here. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Ben Parco.
Now a message from our sponsor. Why settle for switching between multiple design programs to complete a single project? With Vectorworks Architect, you don't have to. Simplify your workflow with a hybrid 2D and 3D modeling environment made to support your work from the pre-design phase all the way through to construction documentation in a single platform. Learn more about the tool that can help you accomplish everything you need with a free 7-day trial of Vectorworks Architect. Get started here at vectorworks.net/business of architecture.
Ben, welcome to the Business of Architecture. How are you?
Hey, good to see you, Ryan. Thanks.
Excellent. My pleasure. Very good to have you on the podcast and to be talking about some of the exciting things that you've been up to. So you are the founder of Parco Studio. You've had a pretty impressive career, working at a lot of large name firms, doing high profile projects. And how long ago was it when you started Parco Studio?
It's been 4 years.
4 years. Okay, so
Yeah.
4 years, and then we met maybe 2 years ago, was it?
Something like that.
2 years ago, and you became a Business of Architecture client and went through one of our programs, and we've remained in touch, and I follow what you're up to and a lot of your innovations, your really beautiful design work that you do. I really enjoyed a lot of the innovation that you were doing not so long ago with kind of AI imagery for some of the residential projects that you were doing. All just they were like provocative imagery to start conversations. Yeah, really, really interesting. And then you and we were talking not so long ago online, and you started to kind of tease me a little bit with some of the development work that you're starting to do and how you're structuring some of these deals. So let's before we get into that, let's start a little bit about kind of a bit of your previous career at some of the larger named firms, and that transition from there into Parco Studio. And then that kind of sets up nicely the context for the work that you're doing in your current form, if you like.
Yeah, sure. I started out in residential with some professors that I, worked for right after school, but then quickly moved to San Francisco from the East Coast, and worked for big firms, James Stewart Polshek and Partners, and worked at SOM for years, and was a design director at Gensler for years, and actually a few others as well. Holton Shaw Jones was kind of a period too, that they're sort of a boutique. West Jones, that was a period as well. And just sort of had there was a way in which I really was into the, just the power's not the right word, but sort of like the capacity that architects have to deliver like big things in the world. Like I just was into it. I think my first project that was sort of like, here, Ben, it was at MBBJ at the time. It was like, here, Ben, this is your project. It's a little 16,000 square foot lab building. You're going to design it. You're going to detail it. You're going to do the CDs. You're going to pitch the client. You're going to do the whole thing. And it was a nice little tester project. And something about like pulling a thing out of the ground from a blank piece of paper was just so exciting to me. And there's a way in which I think that enticement just got me into bigger and bigger and bigger work and bigger firms. At one point I was working on 16 city blocks in Beijing, like all at once.
Wow.
Like millions and millions and millions, 20 million square feet, like boom, pulled out of the ground. 3,000 workers on site at one time. And it was just so exciting and so like almost unbelievable to me that like a group of people could get together and have fun in a cool office environment with like colored pencils and markers and computers and like 3D printers and paper models and just like imagine things. And then years later, like the whole thing's there and people are working and living in it and all. Like it just blew my mind. And there's a way in which I think that sort of excitement just drove me to like bigger and bigger things and bigger places. Now, the thing that didn't work for me is, that comes with baggage, right? It came with all kinds of politics and mostly internal to these firms, which just rubbed me the wrong way. I thought of it more as like a club, but the higher you get in those ranks, the more it turns into some kind of competition or something instead of a club of friends. And that just grated on me more and more, in a kind of an unconscious way, in which ultimately I ended up having to basically, leave and burn bridges and, do all kinds of like messy stuff, honestly, just to kind of finally get myself out.
But it's very difficult once you're in that particular track of architecture. I mean, I know this from, when I was working at Grimshaw and RSHP, it's a similar sort of world, that kind of scale of projects. You're doing skyscrapers, airports, museums, and it's intoxicating in the sense that the projects are they're glamorous, they're big, people are going to know them. There's going to be, in some cases, millions of users of your project. There's a big audience, but then it comes with the delivery mechanism of it is a kind of traditional corporate structure, of which there's loads of really interesting business benefits to that. But as a creative person, there can also be a lot of friction. And also, there's the political side of it internally, which you got to be skilled at navigating or avoiding even.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it is. I think intoxication's a good word, because in a way it was just like kind of being high on architecture for a couple decades and then sort of like sobering up at some point and being like, whoa, like, wait a second, am I really that far down the rabbit hole? And is there a way out? And I think what happened to me is almost unconsciously over a number of positions, over a number of jobs, my internal system just kept saying no, 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 and the intoxication kept saying yes, 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 and eventually I kind of worked myself, unconsciously into enough of a corner that I had no choice but to just stop and open my own shop and hang out my shingle, and and it was almost like a forced move, on my unconscious self to do that.
And what was the kind of work that you went into? Because that's often, that can be quite interesting if you're setting up practice, coming straight out of large practice, that there's either a big jump in the scale of work that you're doing, because now you're working by yourself. And sometimes we see people who they leave a big practice and maybe they take a client with them and they take half a team with them. And then great, that could be a really excellent way of actually starting up a practice and kind of jumping a few steps and working on a small commercial type of lot. Or you've got the other option where you come out of large practice and now you're doing something like on a residential scale, which is just miles apart from a multi-headed corporate client. Which were you, and how did you navigate that in both mentally, emotionally, and like kind of skill-wise, technically?
Yeah, I mean, the former would have been great, but it's not what happened. You know, it was the clients I was working with were so big, and there was so much at stake. And maybe this was a perception on my part. I don't think it was completely, you know, a hallucination. It felt as if there's just no way to like take a client in a substantial project with me.
Yeah.
You know, maybe if I had some kind of buffer resources to feel like I could, okay, I'm going to make payroll for 3 months and pull some people and da-da-da. Like, it just didn't feel like that was going to work. And so, you know, in some crazy way, I did it just even more, just totally blindly, just said, I'm done. I've basically burned all the exits. There's no way out. There's nothing else to be done here. I've worked in every firm in the city, you know, and that's the end of it, right?
Yeah.
So I just hung a shingle out and started kind of posting some stuff to Instagram and making some calls and doing some networking. And remarkably, within like weeks of, and this was right after the pandemic, remarkably within weeks of kind of announcing, and the announcement was not big. It probably reached, I don't know, 100 people or something, you know, actually a reasonable sized commercial project came my way. It was for a furniture showroom for Pivot. Pivot is basically the biggest like Herman Miller Knoll dealer in California.
Right.
And they, you know, they were doing a new LA showroom. They couldn't hire Gensler or SOM or whoever, because then the others would be upset at them for not hiring them. Right. So they were like, we need someone that nobody knows. And I knew the people there, and they said, Ben, would you do this? And, you know, I kind of hummed and hawed. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. You know, it was basically a kind of adaptive reuse tenant improvement project, kind of a, you know, LA warehouse brick building, bowstring truss kind of, you know, ceiling, and a beautiful building. But, you know, the TI interior thing is not exactly my thing. But I was like, well, I don't have any other work, and I know these people, and they know me enough to trust me and basically hire me with, you know, really I just walked into the interview and pulled my website up on the screen and said, hey, here's some things I've done, and this is how we did it. And that was, you know, that's how it launched. And I spent a few years on that project, which it was during the pandemic. It took tons of time to get it through the LA building department, because they were all messed up at the time. And, you know, but in a way, like, it was perfect, because the project sort of, you know, much to the chagrin of the client, the project stretched out because of the permitting process, and it just turned out to be a long period of time where that was my bread and butter. And it allowed me to do other things. So, you know, here's to, you know, miracles.
Love it. So when you came to business of architecture, what were some of the things that led you to us? What were you dealing with what were you dealing with in the practice? And
yeah, I think I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I just really didn't know. I was like, how do I, you know, I've got all this creative, you know, ambition and interest and curiosity, and I'm not done with this career, and how do I make something happen? And I really was not clear on how to do that. And I think at the time, you know, I feel like there's even a conversation around, like, Enoch was wanting to see me further kind of in the arc of the firm's growth. And it was literally just started, and there was like nothing to show, or, there were no people, there were no employees, there was nothing. There was hardly any revenue. And, we decided to, we sort of agreed to just go for it anyway. And, and at the time, my thinking was, I'd rather start and learn how to do things right from the start in a way, and kind of get this thing headed in the right direction, than wait 2 years and make a bunch of mistakes and get a bunch of really bad habits under my belt, and then come to business of architecture and have to like erase it all and relearn everything. And I feel like it feels like it was a really good move. You guys helped so much, and helped to kind of like just add a whole like chunk of brain to my head that didn't exist before. I've been so long in this kind of rarefied world of like design leader in a firm, and I don't have to worry about that, and I don't have to think about that, and other people do that, and I can tell those guys to do that. Like basically spoiled beyond belief. I mean, I didn't have to set up a Zoom call. People would come in and set it up for you, and just so spoiled and lazy. And there's a way in which I just need to learn a ton of things, which is it was kind of perfect timing, because I don't know.
What was when you're looking at the practice now, what are some of the things that you're very kind of pleased with, that you've implemented, that you've built out, that you've actually, and perhaps you could outline some of the challenges that you've navigated around?
Sure. If I just kind of made some categories, it's like, well, marketing and business development, there's a way in which the people part of that comes naturally to me. There's other parts of that don't come so naturally to me. And, there's sort of like too bad, right? Like you just have to do it. I think maybe in a way, like instilling this idea that like money is what drives the practice. It's the thing that allows you to do the work. That getting that into my head so thoroughly, and sort of feeling the truth of that through maybe some economic cycles, and feeling what it's like to make, what's it feel like to make, gross $5,000 a month, and what's it feel like to gross $50,000 a month, and, and seeing like, oh, and what's possible the month after that $50,000 a month. Like suddenly it becomes like blatantly obvious, and it may not have, there's some way in which it may not have been as obvious to me living through that. Had you guys not been sort of in my ear saying, this is what's happening, Ben, like pay attention, right? There's some way in which it just helped to have this kind of heads up display, like BOA heads up display, where something happens and the thing comes up, and I'm looking through that at what's happening, and seeing like, oh, like I see this is because of that, and that's because of this, and it's just brought so much clarity. So I think marketing and business development has been a piece, which it's still probably my biggest challenge, and the thing that I struggle and work on and work to improve and hone every day. And I still watch my BOA peers that are good at it, and kind of pay close attention to what they're doing. And that's like just an everyday thing for me. The financial kind of tracking and just financial tracking in general, and just kind of, even things like accounts receivable. It's like, we're not going to allow clients to hold our money. Like, we did good work. Here it is. We need to get paid. And so like our ARs are like 8 days. Now
amazing.
A little bit of money to maintain that, because I basically say everyone has to pay via ACH. There's no credit cards because the fees are too high. There's no checks. It's all ACH. And I've been using Monograph, which we all kind of have been playing around with at BOA. And they instituted ACH at some point, and I kind of hummed and hawed about it and was kind of cheap about it. And then realized, wait a second, like I've got 6 clients, that's $60 a month. That is way worth it to get paid within 8 days. and not have to be chasing people around and everything else. And so these ways in which like smoothing out all the frictions and all the bumps and making this thing just easy for clients to engage, easy for clients to pay, contracts, and kind of setting up language and sort of ways of talking about the work that is easy for clients to say yes. Like this whole lens of like, getting everything set up so that it's just an easy yes for people. Because there's other people that are asking too, other architects who are vying for work, and you just want to be like the low friction answer. And so that's been huge too.
Let's talk a little bit about because that's really interesting as well, because it kind of sets the scene as well of tuning the business up and putting the fundamentals into place. And I was, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, I was very excited when you and I started talking recently again, and you were talking about some of the innovations that you're having, or some of the deals that you're starting to strike with potential commercial developers, in exchange for how you can kind of start getting involved in those sorts of projects. And I'm a big advocate for any form of architect-led development, or architects just getting involved in development, because this is, I spoke with Jonathan Siegel this morning in San Diego, and we were talking about, he was just making the point of, in his mind, actually being a developer is less risky than being the architect. And there's a lot less friction to deal with it when you're the architect developer, because you don't need to produce so many drawings. You're not having to cover your back for so many different things. You're not having to, you're not getting involved with this problematic triangle of architect, client, and contractor, where, it's always the kind of, the classic schoolboy trio where two are ganging up on the other one.
Yeah.
And
it's going to be ganged up on.
And the architect obviously is usually the most agreeable out of the the other two, and often comes off worse. So this idea of the architect being empowered to be, leading their own projects, I think opens up so much possibility for practices, and also for just wealth and money, that I think it's really, really good, powerful business model to be pursuing and exploring. So perhaps you could talk to that a little bit about your ideas, big picture about what you'd like to be doing, and then that can kind of set the scene for some of the conversations that you're entering into and how you're doing that.
There's basically a power dynamic, right? Of sorts at play always, right? With everybody. And I think in the kind of architect, developer, contractor world, there's a power dynamic, there's a value sort of ecosystem. And, because business is business, the idea is like get the most value, for the least possible, cash you can afford as whatever you're doing. If you're Apple cranking out iPads, or if you're a developer pulling some project out of the ground, like you want to it's because it's free money. Like the second if a 5-minute negotiation saves you $40,000, like that was an incredibly valuable 5 minutes. So if you can sort of like muscle and squeeze and intimidate someone into lower fees, like that's high value time as a developer or whomever. And so, I'm probably, just anyway. So I don't know that, in a way, I don't know that for me, I don't think it's even started as that conversation or idea in my head. I just knew that I wanted to do things, and this does get back to the power dynamic and kind of control in a way. It's like, I wanted to do things the way that I wanted to do them. Like, I know how to do some things really well. And it doesn't mean they have to be expensive or exorbitant or outrageous or crazy. They can be perfectly sane and sober and really brilliant at the same time. And like, and to find a developer who will let you do that, who will trust that you're sane and sober, but let you do something like really elevated and amazing, like that's not easy.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a star architect, it's one thing because that's what they're signing up for. They're coming in, they know that you're going to deliver this outrageous thing, and that's what they're paying for, is that kind of brand power thing. But at a smaller scale, like that's hard to come by. And so I think some internal part of me was just interested in doing things my way for once. And, you know, the few ways that has begun to occur to me as like, oh, we can do this and we can do that, has just been at a small residential scale. You know, my partner and I purchased a piece of land a few years ago and have been designing a home for this land that's very unusual, very cost effective.
This is the A-frame building, right?
Yeah. I call it the italic A. It's kind of straight on one side and slanted on the other side. And, you know, it's an unusual house. It's small. It's only, you know, 1,300 square feet or something. But, you know, it's sort of a daylight filled, very kind of fungible spaces that can be used in all kinds of ways. And
it's in California?
Yeah, and we haven't built it yet, right? We've designed it, and we're sort of saving money and
sure.
And you know, it hardly has any interior walls, just where there's almost like a commercial core that runs through the building, and everything else is open, and the core divides the kind of public and private sides of the house. And you know, and it's all heavy timber, glue lam construction, these big kind of timber beds. And in a way, it's like a super simple building. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in like, how can we do something really simply from a construction and kind of tectonic standpoint, but do something really beautiful and do it on a piece of land, which is maybe a little bit challenged in its daylighting and such, but capture as much light as we can where we can get it, and just sort of make something special where someone else might do what I call plopitecture, which is just kind of plop a thing there and, you know, it's done. And so, you know, so that's just been
that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
So that was kind of the first foray into that world, just like almost giving myself and through really like intense amounts of trust and generosity from my partner, basically, you know, my development partner, right? My life partner is my development partner, and trusts me and sees me and knows me well enough to trust that like we can do this and we can go in this direction. And so that was kind of number one. It's like, let's do this. And you know, and even with a developer, like we fought and struggled and, you know, like really kind of got into it around all kinds of aspects of this thing that she didn't understand. And, and I had to kind of, you know, show up in the ways that one has to show up to try to get it, you know, have someone see what I'm seeing, which isn't so easy. But it was kind of a great process and sort of, I think, gave us the bug in a way. And what happened is, before we were even able to finish that project, a house in the same neighborhood area, not even, I mean, it's kind of a neighborhood. We live in a pretty rural part of California. A house nearby, 10-minute walk away, came on the market, completely rotten, this molding, squirrels living in the roof, you know, buckets in the living room, a line of buckets 20 feet long collecting water that's coming through the roof, like really rotten. Big burly contractors would not step inside because the mold stench was too intense for them. Now that doesn't normally happen. Like, you know, like they would put the gloves on, like big tough guys that are normally like, I don't care, you know. So this house came on the market and we loved the basic bones of it, even though half the bones were rotten. And we kind of like forgot that we had just bought this other piece of land and decided to build a house on it, and couldn't help ourselves but to just like, let's buy this house and make it great, because it's a really beautiful structure and it can be amazing. And that's what we've been doing the last year. So so there, at a mini level, we just personally have been taking our resources, our time, our energy, our money, and pouring it into some projects for ourselves, self-development, whether we live in them or don't live in them or rent them out or put our aging parents in them or whatever it ultimately ends up being. California real estate is a thing, and this is where we live. And so it seemed like we can add some value to our own portfolios in a way, and do some good work at the same time, and kind of all proof of concept that like this little shop, Parco Studio, can do some things and they're good. And so that was sort of the beginning of, I think, this idea for me, is just like no one else even involved except my partner and I.
What were some of the key lessons that you've learned from, just simply the acquisition of a piece of land, and then you're kind of designing something speculative on it, and then also, the work with, taking the risk of buying this dilapidated but charming property. What sorts of lessons have you learned there around development or just managing risk? Because actually that's quite a nice way of managing your risk like that, when there's something that potentially, well, you could live in it. So you kind of you take away some kind of development risk, thereby it's got a function for you.
For sure. Well, a few things. One is, I think you quickly metabolize the idea of risk in a way that maybe you don't as an architect, right? Depending on your kind of lineage and upbringing as an architect, like you might just not be that aware of like the risks, or you might be, if you're kind of a little more kind of developer minded. I tend to come from that developer world, so I'm pretty aware of roughly what kind of risks are involved, but it's a whole different ballgame when it's your own money, and it becomes very real very fast. And so suddenly you're developer and architect, and you have to kind of wear both hats. And suddenly every single decision you make is fraught with some risk. And so you're making decisions differently, and through not just your architect lens, but through your developer risk lens. And it's pretty sobering, honestly, and kind of enlightening in a way as to like what these folks are actually dealing with on a daily basis. Because the phrase I always use is architecture and construction. It's kind of death by a million cuts. Like there's no one piece of the project that actually costs that much. It's so spread evenly. Like the peanut butter is spread structure and plumbing and electrical and finishes, and it's just spread very evenly. You can't like save yourself. There's no silver bullet. There's nothing you can do to save yourself. If you make 20 bad decisions, they just add up and up and up and up, and before you know it, you're 50% over budget. And so I've known this instinctively, and it's kind of the way I think about my clients' work. When it's your own money and you're paying the contractors every 2 weeks, you really start to see it pretty fast and start to metabolize that truth in a way that you never can. So you just can't if it's not.
Well, I think it's such a sobering experience when we've done, very small scale renovation here in the apartment in New York, and just having a contractor tear something down and then do it again, and then being like, right, okay, actually, this is my change order here that's happening, and this is and it's costing me. And then I remember at the end of the day, you were like, right, that's cost me X thousands of dollars to do that. Was it worth it?
And then you look at that thing and you're like, was that worth $4,000? That little detail that I just didn't like how that didn't align with that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it really puts a different flavor onto the drive, your kind of design drive or something, or it just gives another depth to it. I think that's really there's nothing else where it's, on the one hand, when you're managing somebody else's money as an architect and encouraging them to make decisions, and then when it's your own money, there's just a different reality to it.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. So that's been a huge piece of it. It's just understanding the money and the risk and seeing what how those little decisions add up and influence the bottom line at the end of the day. I think that, so to answer the other part of your question, one of the things we've done is to really, because we kind of painted ourselves into a little bit of a corner. We bought this property, we designed a house for it. We haven't permitted that house yet. Then we bought another house that's falling apart. And we're living in a third house that we're renting. It's like, this is a problem. Like, this doesn't look too clever at all.
Yeah.
And so, then there's this kind of permutational, scenario math that goes on of like, okay, how does this work? Like, we bought we have this land, we can build that later on. Well, we can't now because we have to worry about this thing that we just bought. It's a 2-story house. It's actually quite easily demisable into 2 units. So one of the things we did is we just plumbed it and electrified it for 2 units. And it, we haven't built 2 kitchens, but we stubbed it out and we can basically put another kitchen in and a wall downstairs. And suddenly you've got a really lovely 1-bedroom apartment, condo, whatever you want, in-law unit, whatever you want it to be. A full bath. There could be a full kitchen very easily, and you put in 1 wall and suddenly it works as a unit. All you have to do is close off the stair. And then the upstairs could be its own unit. It already has it, we put a brand new kitchen in there. We built a bedroom on the back. And so that's a unit too. And then there's a little shed in the back that we plan to rebuild that could actually be its own little living quarters or Airbnb or whatever. And so as we thought about, how do we de-risk this for ourselves? It's like, well, let's build this thing. Let's plan it to be able to turn into 2, maybe even 3 units. Let's try to live in it. Let's see if we can make enough money to support this asset that we've created. And if we can't, we'll spend a little more money and split it in 2 and then start to kind of, make it make sense financially. Or move an in-law in and something, right? Like, just being able to do that made a bunch of sense to us. Now we're in a situation where, our other piece of land, which has a construction loan, which basically goes from a land loan to a construction loan.
Right.
That when that loan flips, it basically times out as a land loan after 3 years. And if you haven't started building on it, the rate goes up. Well, we haven't started building on it because we got busy with this thing. So now we either have to pay some crazy rate on that piece of land, which we're not going to do, or we have to basically buy out that loan and own that piece of land outright. So now what we're looking at is like, okay, we bought this house for about 50% of what it's now worth, put another 50% of cash in to build it out. It's done. Now it's worth more. So our equity is like way more than the bank even knows. So so now what we're looking at is a cash out refinance on the house that we're living in to pull some cash out to pay off that piece of land over there. So there's this whole kind of shell game going on with money just to like.
Well, it's yeah, and it's quite nice actually because you're sort of, you're in that position now where you can kind of start to leverage the asset that you've created already here, refinance it, and then kind of brings a bit more certainty to another piece of land rather than it just kind of spinning out of control.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, what is it like in terms of your property taxes there with when you're building something and then you're owning a property on it and it's not being let out, etc.?
The property taxes are what they are. It's California. They're high. That's just part of it. There's nothing we can do about that. And, if the equation, the kind of, the balance sheet equation changes if we go to rent it and turn it into a rental property as a residence for ourselves, it's got kind of one tax equation. The second we start renting out part or all of it, now it's a business.
Right.
Now we can take all of the money that we put into it and use that towards our tax basis and actually make the math work out better in a way.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a whole tax game that can be played there ultimately if we decide to rent out part or all of this. So, it has been, I mean, it's been kind of amazing to me. I mean, I don't know if I even quite realized it until you just sort of underscored it, but there is a way in which it's shocking how quickly, like, we went from two people living in a communal household with another family like a year ago to buying a piece of land, with a mortgage, to buying another thing with a mortgage, to now like having this like little pile of asset and debt that we can kind of jiggle around and kind of do creative things with in the tiniest short of time with almost nothing going in. Like, it's been sort of amazing to see just how that kind of machinery and the fungibility of like money and financing can like work for you. And it's not like you need 20 years of, experience or legacy or anything to even do it. You could just go do it, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of wild. You need a little cash to start, but you can also supplement that with, some crazy elbow grease if you have to, which is what we did on this thing. I mean, we were up on the roof in harnesses and angle grinders, like grinding mold off of the framing, so there's been a lot of sweat involved, but boy, if you can like just get that little advantage, suddenly a whole world opens up.
I mean, it's amazing that, as an architect, what the sorts of savings that you can make in your own projects by one, if you want to kind of be the GC and you want to take that a step further and actually be some of the builders involved in it. And there's no shortage of architects who get a real kick out of doing that and enjoyment, but also just in terms of the amount of information that needs to be produced, you can reduce that as a kind of a set of drawings that you might be doing for an external client, and the efficiency which you can kind of drive in the project and what you can get in terms of the value that you're creating. It's enormous.
Well, and that's what we did here, right? It's been kind of wild because I have 2 floor plans and 1 cross section through this building. I have no other drawings. I didn't draw detail. I didn't draw anything. Like, there's just nothing. And I GC'd it myself. So we basically hired all the trades and framers and everybody. And I was just on site every day telling them what to do and where to do it and how to do it. And, the sheathing of the building is covered with, Sharpie sketches of like, okay, do this that way, do that way. But, I didn't spend 3 months like building some immaculate set of drawings, like you say, that someone might ignore anyway. But instead I was just here, retaining that 20% that I would have paid to a GC anyway, not spending 3 months drawing drawings as an architect, and just kind of like, pulling the thing out of the ground as quickly as possible and getting to live in it. So for sure, yeah, it's kind of wild if you even just flip that whole script of like, what are the pieces that we do and don't do and touch, and how can we do those?
And the other asset as well that you're creating is that when it's a project that's been driven by yourself, is that you've now got this kind of this building that can be a calling card, marketing collateral, and certainly nowadays with the kind of amount of social media and different ways that we can publish ourselves, there's a 1,000 different stories that we can tell and indulge on one single project that we've got the behind the scenes access to, which can just enhance the brand and the marketing of the architectural services as well in the more traditional kind of business model.
Agreed. And what I'm actually appreciating about this crazy topsy-turvy thing that we've gone through here is that I got to do all that and practice that on this house instead of on the Italic A up the street, which is a new build, right? Like,
Yeah.
like I was going to be the GC on that, but I really didn't know what I was doing. Now that I've been the GC on this, I'm like, oh, I can do that. Like that's like going to be way easier and, harder in some ways, but like I kind of know what I'm doing now, in a way that I didn't a year ago. And so that's just kind of a nice accident that, this whole crazy process has bestowed upon me.
Tell us a little bit about the client that we were talking about, where you're the joint venture that you're entering into, because I think this is a really interesting story to kind of start to document, and I'd love to kind of track your progress along with this, and it kind of ties in nicely to the kind of next stage of evolution of the sorts of way that you've been practicing with development already.
Yeah. Thanks. I mean, this idea, again, it's one of these kind of kernels that has been floating around in all the BOA discussions. And I always found kind of interesting this idea of like, and I think the way we had talked about it in the course had been something along the lines of, basically a sort of, a bonus for some kind of performance bonus in a way, right? The idea that there may be a developer and you're an architect, and it's like, hey, if I can get you 2 more units in this multi-unit housing project, what's that worth? And can we kind of negotiate, some kind of performance bonus that comes as a result of us delivering, right? Which I always found to be really interesting and kind of exciting way to think about it. Then just completely by accident, I walked into a shop locally. It's owned by a real estate broker and his wife. She does staging, which is why it's a shop, because all the staging stuff lives in the shop and then goes out, but you can buy it too. And just kind of, started up a conversation with this guy who I didn't really know. Turns out he's a real estate agent, really, not even really a developer per se, but he does develop projects once in a while. When he sees it, because he's out and about, he sees land, he's got a good eye for a good deal. And there have been, points where if he sees a good piece of land, he'll put together a little consortium of buyers, basically clients of his, high net worth clients who have money that they want to diversify. And he'll make a little, put together a little LLC and buy a piece of land and build something on it. And so we got to talking, and it became apparent pretty quickly in our conversation that, he basically had a piece of land, has a house on it that is, almost falling down. It's a kind of a rental building, but it really needs to go. And the plan is to put a multi-unit building on there, probably between like 20 and 30 units. We'll sort of see how it turns out. Mostly contingent on parking more than anything, probably. But it became pretty apparent pretty quickly that, he was sort of like, oh, you're an architect, and, have you done multi-unit work? And, ultimately it started to become apparent to me that he just didn't have an architect, and that maybe they don't even have money for an architect. That somehow, maybe in the spirit of what I've been doing, which is like, seat of your pants, we don't actually know what we're doing, but we're going to do a thing. He somehow pulled together a consortium of buyers to buy this piece of real estate. And yet they didn't really have a pro forma or fund set aside for any soft costs at all. But the idea was to do this multifamily housing project. And so once that became clear to me, I immediately just broached the idea of like, well, what if we did some equity share kind of deal and you guys didn't have to pay me a penny? And, as that conversation went, the way it's turned out, and again, it was sort of like, how do I make this, it looked like a huge opportunity to me. And it's like, how do I make this really compelling? And like, it's just an easy yes, back to that kind of friction question.
Yeah.
Like, this guy has partners, they're going to have a say, they're going to be worried. How do I make this so easy for everybody that, everyone says yes? And, and maybe the upside of that is like, it's actually so compelling for me that, that I'm willing to stretch. Well, one of the things he told me was that, they don't know if they're going to build this building or not, that they probably won't even build it. They may just entitle it, which is a big deal in California. The entitlement process is fraught and long and protracted. And just getting planning permissions only is a big deal. And if you have planning permissions, selling that piece of land with those permissions on it to a developer, or even just sometimes it's a general contractor who just has some cash or some cheap financing and can pull it out of the ground, that is that's done all the time. And it's kind of a low risk way for developers to make some money without, worrying about market cycles and absorption rates and all the other things that they worry about. And so he said, look, we probably just will entitle this and try to sell it. And at that point I was like, oh, wow. Like that process is, it's a lot easier and faster. It's still pain because we're in California and it just is, but it's way less of a lift than like doing a full set of, all the way through construction documents and construction administration and all of that. So, what the deal I proposed to him was that we just do it, and we do it, kind of no money down, and, that if we can get him entitlements, and we've set a time limit by a certain date, that we just take ownership in the project. And then when it sells, we have a substantial proportion, it turns out, of the project value. The way he had, so one of the ways I did this was I went around to a bunch of my kind of developer friends, people I knew from Gensler and SOM and elsewhere. And I said, what's the per unit value for an entitlement on a multifamily project? So what I mean by that is like, if you have a 20 unit project, maybe those, and you haven't built anything, but you're selling that land is worth the cost of the land or the value of the land plus, nominally $100,000 per unit. You haven't built anything yet, just because you have an entitled planning permission. And so I went around and asked developer friends and kind of built a spreadsheet looking at like, what is that value? What's the over under? How bad could it be? How good could it be? And then also what I did is I asked him for his LLC agreement. I said, I'd like to see what your agreement with your partners looks like so I can understand what that whole math is like. And so I could understand the split between him as a managing partner and then his, the general partners who are, really just kind of silent partners in a way. And what I realized is they've all put in cash. He's put in cash too. So he's both a managing partner and a general partner because he's also put cash in.
Sure.
But then as a managing partner, he takes this huge swath off the top.
As it kind of fees.
To make the project happen.
Yeah.
And so what I realized is like, oh, well, sounds like you need another managing partner. You just need, you need another person by your side who's basically splitting your fee. You're doing this side. You bought the land. You structured the LLC deal. You're a real estate broker, so you're going to sell it. But I can help you sell it as the architect, and I'll get you an entitlement. And so we'll just take that managing partner piece and become partners in that part of the LLC equation. And that way, the people down here in the general partners, they don't lose anything. We kind of went back and forth for, I don't know, 2 months or something on this, and just kind of talked about numbers and ratios, and eventually he was like, yeah, let's do it. So we're doing it.
Love it.
Yeah. And I mean, what it amounts to, this is the amazing part, is like we basically have 20% ownership in this project, which is a lot. And the beauty of it is I do my part at cost, right? Like I don't there's kind of a presumed value of what we're delivering at a kind of a retail value of that, but I get to do the whole thing at cost, and so the upside for me is huge.
So you've negotiated your kind of equity, your input at a certain market value, what you'd be
market value,
what you'd be charging, and that's kind of your token. But actually, it's what already what it's costing you is
20% of that, or
20% of that, 30% of that, because that's the business model that you'd be doing.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, so there's kind of like a double bump. The whole thing just like makes so much sense on paper. So at that point, like it was so attractive to me, and he was like, well, what if we, what if there were all these scenarios, like, what if we don't, what if it doesn't happen, or, what if this and what if that, and there are a few of those in our contract that we kind of manage, but for the most part, the upside is so great for me, and the cost is so little. Basically, to make the yes so easy, I just said, look, we either deliver the thing or we don't. And if we don't get anything. And they're like, yeah, right. Like they love that. So that's kind of been that one, which has been real. And, and we've got a great working relationship, and we're having fun, and we're both learning stuff from one another. And he's excited enough that I was like, well, let's finish this one, and let's just go do another one, and you'll just be my managing partner on these projects. I'm like, great.
Love it. Brilliant.
Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful story. Very excited to hear how it turns out. For you, for you, obviously you've got the risk of, the time and the effort and the resources that it will cost you to put into it. And obviously the risk that could have on the business, and on your other paying projects, if you like.
Yeah.
But what else is at risk for you in that?
There's really nothing else. Like there's that risk, and that risk is sort of absolute, right? Because there's not really much in the way of like other kind of compensation clauses or anything. Like we either deliver or we don't deliver. And that's the end of it. Now it's different if they decide not to sell, or if they, there are clauses in there for if they change their mind or flake out or whatever. But if everything's go and we don't deliver, we just don't deliver, and that's what happens. But part of the equation here too is as painful as it can be to entitle work in California, this particular municipality that we're in is very easy. Pro development. They've been pressured by the state to pull housing out of the ground. And so they're highly, highly motivated in a way that lots of cities are not in California. So that changes. That's half the battle, is just, do I have a planning, director who's on the side of building something, and if so, if so, then why wouldn't we do it? And there are other factors that I've looked at. We've looked at the city and the part of town that this building is in, and the particular parcel, and the zoning map, and just to see, like, if we had a crystal ball, knowing what we know about this city, knowing what we know about the planning director, knowing what we know about this particular neighborhood, it's kind of transitional, and it's sort of mixed between, single story residential, and then this other side of the street is taller stuff. All of that, if we had to guess with 30 plus years of experience, does this look like this is going to happen? Yeah. Like, maybe no one will pull it out of the ground, but that's not my problem. My problem is, can we get this entitled within a year? Absolutely.
Brilliant.
So it's just kind of balanced, managing those risks and kind of putting together some sort of lens to look through at the whole thing and assess, like, what can we offer that's going to be so positive and affirming to everybody, and so low risk to us that, that it feels good. Kind of that simple.
Love it. Excellent.
I've been surprised at how sort of, in a way, easy the whole thing has been, which has kind of been just another one of these, so kind of like the surprise of like how much leverage you can acquire in so short a period of time if you are willing to do some things development wise on your own. This has been similar. It's like, how much leverage can you acquire quickly just by kind of looking at things carefully and taking a
risk. Yeah, taking a risk. Brilliant. Love it. I'm very excited about this, and I look forward to, we'll touch base again on the podcast and hear how it all unfolds and what's next. I think that's the perfect place to conclude the conversation, Ben. Thank you so much for being so candid and just open about, what you've been doing and the kind of deals that you've been structuring. That's been very refreshing.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been fun. Thanks, Ryan.
And that's a wrap.
Hey, Enoch Sears here, and I have a request. Since you are a listener here of the Business of Architecture podcast, Ryan and I, we love putting this podcast together. We love sharing information as much as we can glean from all the other industries that we're a part of to bring it back to empower you as an architect and a designer. And one thing that helps us in our mission is the growth of this podcast, simply because it helps other architects stand for more of their value, spreads the business information that we're sharing to empower architects together so architects, designers, engineers can really step into their greatness, whatever that looks like for each individual. And so here my simple ask is for you to join us and be part of our community by doing the following: heading over to iTunes and leaving a review of the podcast. And as an expression of our sincere thanks, we would like to give you a free CEU course that can get you one professional development unit, but more importantly, will give you a very solid and firm foundation on your journey to becoming a profitable and thriving architect. So here's the process for that. After you leave us a review, send an email to support@businessofarchitecture.com. Let us know the username that you use to leave the review, and we will send you that free training. On the training, you'll discover what 99% of architecture firm owners wish they would have known 20 years ago. And the other 1%, well, they just didn't even know that they didn't know. Head over to iTunes and leave us a review now.
Now a message from our sponsor. Why settle for switching between multiple design programs to complete a single project? With Vectorworks Architect, you don't have to. Simplify your workflow with a hybrid 2D and 3D modeling environment made to support your work from the pre-design phase all the way through to construction documentation in a single platform. Learn more about the tool that can help you accomplish everything you need with a free 7-day trial of Vectorworks Architect. Get started here at vectorworks.net/business of architecture.
The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract bond, or commitment, except to help you be unstoppable.